Hi everyone, welcome to the June 15th edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragona, and if you were listening to last week's episode of the Pacecast, you probably heard that my usual co-host Craig is going to be out for the next several weeks. He is undergoing surgery as he donates a kidney to his daughter, which is just a really admirable thing, and I know that's just the kind of dad that Craig is, and he wouldn't want me to wax on about that, but I think I speak for all of us and the listeners as we wish Craig and his family the best during this time and a speedy recovery to both of them. I do hope Craig is back soon, but in his absence, we are going to continue recording some of these podcasts. And since I don't want you to get sick of just hearing my voice, we're going to have some guests on over the next several weeks. And today I'm happy to be joined by my DRF colleague, Marcus Hersh, who kindly filled in for me last week on the Pacecast with Craig. Marcus always has a fresh point of view, and I'm looking forward to discussing this week's races with him. We don't have quite the number of Grade 1 races that he dissected with Craig last week as they talked about all of those Belmont Stakes Day Grade 1s, but we did have some interesting racing action during the past week. The return of Mandaloun and the Pegasus. We'll get to that in a little bit. Also, today was the start of the Royal Ascot meet over in England. I know that's something that Marcus has been covering, so we might get into that a bit at the end of the show. But Marcus, welcome back to the Pacecast.
Thanks, David. Pleased to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you on. And we're going to start off with some of the racing that took place in this country over the past week. And there were a couple of races at Monmouth Park last weekend that I think are worth starting off the Pacecast with. One of those is the one that I mentioned at the top. That was Mandaloun, who probably will eventually be named the Kentucky Derby winner. For now, I guess we're supposed to call him the second place finisher in the Kentucky Derby. He did return in the Pegasus last week at Monmouth, his first start since that Kentucky Derby. Justifiably bet down to be a pretty heavy favorite, but he had to work a little bit harder than some people might have expected.
Yeah, I mean, how hard he worked, I guess, is subject to some debate. Since the jockey came back saying that he wasn't even blowing hard after the race, and you know, I think the work. I don't know. It's always hard to try to guess at what's going on with horses, how hard they're trying. But it did look like he had the race pretty easily. Won in mid-stretch before idling. I thought he idled and Wayburn came back on. I thought it was. I don't know what your take on the whole race was. I thought it was a really strange race, kind of from start to finish.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. I mean, obviously, he was a deserving heavy favorite, and the neck margin of victory might lead some people to say that he wasn't at his best, or maybe he bounced off the Kentucky Derby. I think what you say about him idling, there has to be some truth to that. Just given the fact that he made that big move, looked like he was going to go on to a clear victory, and it just seemed like he wasn't totally focused towards the end of the race. I will say that he did have to make a pretty big run on the turn into what was a relatively slow pace. I mean, if we look at the pace figure line in TimeformUS, the first couple fractions are much lower than the final time number. And
yeah,
you could see that. I mean, they really quickened up the race coming around the far turn. So he was moving into the fastest portion of the race. So I guess he had a right to flatten out a little bit at the end.
Yeah, I think that you've hit on the key part of the performance. If you want to take something positive away from it, that third quarter in 23:80 was easily the fastest quarter in the race. They really accelerated when Wayburn put the Lugamo away. You know, it was partly Lugamo being overmatched, but Wayburn really kind of took off. And that's the section. I mean, running the turn well, there's definitely something to be said for it. What I thought was weird was how, I mean, I know he got a little bit squeezed at the start. I was surprised that Giroux was so content to be at the very back behind a slow pace. I almost guessed that they were like trying to give him an education to see how he responded to these completely different circumstances, since he has shown a lot more positional pace in the past. But I didn't see anything that supported that idea. I mean, it was just like he got pinched back a little and he took a hold, and there he was sitting in last. The no whip thing is maybe meaningful. This is a horse who is not maybe totally tight on psychologically and isn't a fully formed racehorse. There was never an excuse found for his poor performance in Louisiana Derby, which might have been a question of him just not focusing on the day. And he did have blinkers added during the winter when they felt like he wasn't putting out as much as he might. If that's the kind of horse he is, that's the kind of horse who, you can imagine being more affected by an inability to use a riding crop for quote unquote encouragement in the stretch than some horses. I think that played a part. I think in the end, David, my takeaway is it was like maybe he's a little rusty or just a little flat coming back from the Derby, even though he got some time after it. It clearly wasn't, to me, his best race, but if he does well coming out of it, he didn't have to run that hard, and it could be a very useful sort of stepping stone race to more important objectives in the summer and into the early autumn.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it was just a prep race, and I think it's never wise to make too much of preps when horses probably aren't fully cranked to put out their peak performance on the day. It's natural to bring up the whip thing as you did. I've seen both sides, or both takes, I should say, coming out of this race, that Mandaloun didn't win by 3 lengths because Florent Geroux couldn't use the whip, and also that Weyburn wasn't able to come back and beat him because his rider didn't have the whip. So I mean, you can look at it different ways, and really there's no way to know unless you have a time machine and you can go back and let these riders use the whip. When I was watching the race, it didn't seem to me like Mandaloun like pricked his ears once he got to the front. I mean, like he saw something. I mean, there was none of that. And the same thing with Weyburn. I mean, Weyburn's just the kind of horse that even when he won his maiden race, he was idling a little bit. He looks like the kind of horse that waits on horses a little bit. And I think that's what happened when they came to the top of the stretch. And that's why it looked like Mandaloun maybe made that move that appeared it was as if it was going to carry him to an open length victory. And it didn't, because Weyburn can be the kind of horse that will fight once he sees another horse. So I thought they both ran a really nice race. I mean, Weyburn is a pretty good horse in his own right. We saw that in the Gotham, and I mean, whatever happened in the Wood Memorial, I don't want to read too much into that. That was just kind of a weird race all around. But I think they're both nice horses, and they should both have a say when they move on to the Haskell next.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Weyburn, he showed that he's somewhat legitimate, and it was a nice bounce back race. A race he may have needed too. I mean, he hadn't run in quite a little bit, and if you take the positive view, he did come back on pretty nicely the final half furlong to make a race of it, and leaving Dr. Jack behind, with whom he was head and head at before the 16th pole. So that was pretty encouraging.
I thought it was interesting. Maybe you have more insight into this. That those 3 horses that were the 3, big names coming into this, Mandaloun, Weyburn, and Brooklyn Strong, they all did not race with Lasix here. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think they're allowed to at Monmouth. I guess the connections just decided to continue with no Lasix racing. And that's just an interesting thing for some connections that do tend to use Lasix with most of their horses.
Yeah. Yeah, the one race they can't use Lasix at Monmouth is the Haskell. So perhaps with an eye toward that, that could explain why there was no Lasix on those horses.
The other race that took place at Monmouth last weekend, that was their feature race on the weekend, was the Grade 3 Salvatore Mile on Saturday. This one going a mile for the older horses on the dirt. And pretty massive upset in this one, as New York Traffic was bet down as the heavy favorite off an impressive victory for Saffie Joseph in his prior start at Belmont. And he got a great trip, but just had no answer for the pretty impressive late run from the 79-1 shot Informative, who came up the rail late.
Yeah, you can see, a different day, but the half mile was considerably faster in this race than in the Pegasus. I think it was I don't know. What did you guys have this one coded as? Like, it had to have been a solid pace, at least, if not lightning fast.
Yeah, when I looked at the TimeformUS pace figure line, I was expecting it to be coded as maybe a fast pace, but when you look at New York Traffic's line, it was actually pretty even throughout. I mean, he did have a 124 at the half mile and regressed a little bit to a 118 at the finish, but it generally was a pretty even pace.
Yeah. I don't know. I think he just didn't run that well. I mean, I think he was fine. Joseph, the trainer before the race, was like talking about it being the kind of a dividing point to determine whether he'd go 2 turns or 1. And I hadn't really thought of 2 turns as being a major issue for him, but maybe he just doesn't really stay that much. But I mean, I definitely didn't have Informative, but genius in retrospect. The 80-1, I would say, was pretty absurd for this horse. I mean, yeah, I could see like 35 or something like that, but I mean, he had, the thing is, he had been alternated between routes and sprints. He ran one pretty good route race in the mud, albeit, but he won off by open lengths at Parks. And then he had suddenly, in his last start at Pimlico, popped the best race of his career. And this was not a distinguished field, I didn't think. I mean, the reason that the favorite was so short is because of that fact. I would have kind of grouped that the winner, more in with the mass of horses that looked like, well, if everything went right, maybe they could get a piece of it, rather than this completely implausible winner.
Yeah, New York Traffic was sort of a funny, heavy favorite in this race because he's got that reputation that's kind of built on the one race that he ran in the Haskell last year where he almost beat Authentic. And
that's right.
It does kind of stick out like a sore thumb in his PPs. I know he got a huge figure last time when he beat New York Breds at Belmont, but that was just a different class of horse and a different pace situation. This was a much more true test for New York Traffic, and he just didn't quite pass it. Not that he ran a bad race. I mean, he got a 120 Timeform US speed figure, and I think the buyer was similar to that. I think Informative got a number around 100. Yeah. So, I mean, he ran a fine. He just didn't have an answer for a horse that was primed to run a career best race on the day. And you make a good point about Informative. That price probably was a little bit high for a horse who was coming off a career best effort. And I was going in Formulator and looking back at that race at Pimlico, and that's just been a super live race. We haven't seen Mischief Afoot come back yet, who won that race, but the two who finished right behind him have come back and run some pretty nice speed figures in subsequent starts. So even though Informative's prior form didn't really suggest that he had this kind of improvement coming, his last race did suggest that he had turned the corner, and we've seen these connections do it before. They sent out Discreet Lover to win the Jockey Club Gold Cup at something like 50-1 a few years ago. So they can spring with a big priced horse in a major stakes race.
I mean, I wish I would have seen it coming. I didn't see it coming. But with the pace the way it was, I don't think you could just say that it was too fast. I think you hit on a key point that Nye Traffic, as I like to call him, just might be kind of a middling listed stakes type of horse. We'll see.
Yeah, I think it remains to be seen where he really fits from a class perspective. And given that this race was at Monmouth, once again, you saw plenty of chatter about the fact that New York Traffic might have lost this race because his rider didn't carry a whip. I mean, once again, it's hard to say that, to be sure about that stuff. Paco Lopez, for what it's worth, is a rider that never makes a lot of use of the whip. He's a real strong hand rider.
Yeah, when they're talking about these powerful finishers of their own, like getting beat because they don't have a crop, I don't really get it.
No, I mean, I think what really got New York Traffic beat was the fact that he was drifting so badly in the stretch. He seemed to be getting a good trip in about the 2 or 3 path on the turn, but he really drifted out coming into the lane, and it left that path wide open for a horse to come through. And Jose Ferrer, who rode Informative, gave this horse a fantastic ride to get up, but just maybe a horse who's turned the corner now as a 4-year-old.
The jockey has been he's been riding there from the start of the meet, and I think he's adapted really well to riding without using a crop or anything but safety. He seems comfortable, and maybe there is something to the local riders getting more accustomed to it than people coming in. Just to correct myself, 96 was the figure for New York Traffic. I thought I had pulled up his post-race PPs, but I was looking at his previous figure.
Yeah, that's right in line with the Timeform US number. Usually there's a 20-point difference, and Informative got a 120 from Craig, who did the number for this race. And yeah, I mean, with the whole whip thing, I don't want to get stuck on this point for too long, but I think we have a pretty similar outlook on this. And what you say about the local riders, I think, is really interesting. And I noticed it when I was watching the race that we just talked about, the Pegasus, how Florent Giroux kind of was just giving Mandaloun a pretty strong hand ride. And you see some of these other riders like Dylan Davis, who was riding Weyburn, kind of come up with some more creative ways to motivate their horses, a technique where they really give a vigorous shake of the reins. And you saw Jose Ferrer doing much the same thing with Informative. And
absolutely.
There were the narrative coming into this meet was that these horses wouldn't have a turn of foot, or they wouldn't be able to close without the encouragement of the whip. And I think that's really proven to be not the case. I mean, Informative showed as impressive a turn of foot as I've seen from any horse in a stakes on the dirt in the past few weeks in this race. So definitely a horse that didn't need that kind of encouragement to produce this effort.
Absolutely. Closers have had no problem closing if they're the right horse in the spot. There's no question in my mind.
Let's move on to another venue on Sunday at Pimlico. They ran a few stakes races. We're going to talk about two of them. One was the Prince George's County on the turf for the older horses, and one that I've been a big fan of for the past few months or so, Pixelate, a horse that I thought probably didn't achieve his best due to some trips last year. I was of the opinion that maybe he might be the equal of a horse like Gufo, who he lost to in the Belmont Derby. And I thought maybe when he finally got the right trip against Top Company, he'd be able to deliver. I'm not sure that that's really panned out. He's been a bit of a disappointment. But he was in against his friends here, the right kind of class. And he got the job done with a good trip.
Yeah, he was scratched from the Monmouth Stakes, which I think he would have lost. Because I think, well, maybe. But, I mean, the reason he was scratched is because this seemed like a better spot and they wanted to win a race with him. And I absolutely hear what you're saying. And I remember those trips you're talking about, and you were all over that when he was too far behind slow paces and finished better than people realized. But I do think that, I think his ceiling, I think you just touched on it, that his ceiling has gotten somewhat established and it's maybe not that high. I think he's a grade 3 kind of horse at base, in the right spot. Maybe he could win a grade 2. He's pretty. I mean, he consistently delivers a decent finish. It's just that he doesn't have that. He doesn't have brilliant acceleration. He doesn't have great tactical speed. His run doesn't sustain forever. I mean, these are the limitations that don't quite get him up to that level. But I do give him a lot of credit, and the barn, Mike Stidham's barn, for just developing a consistent racehorse. If properly spotted, is going to win races like this, I think, pretty steadily.
Yeah, I completely agree with what you said about this horse's turn of foot. He just doesn't have much of one. That's really been a detriment to him in some of these top level races where most of the running is done in the final quarter mile, and often he can't go with those horses or really make up ground on them when he needs to. But I mean, that said, it's not like he's run badly in some grade 1 races. Like I mentioned, the Belmont Derby, he only was beaten 3 lengths in the Pegasus, but I think that was back when this division looked a little more wide open. Since we've seen the emergence of domestic spending as a real dominant horse in this division, you start to see more of a gap between the grade 1 horses and a horse like Pixelate, who I agree with you is probably more of a grade 3 type.
Yeah, I think the top of the division is pretty strong. Colonel Liam's Thud in the Manhattan aside, I think there are more like really good 1.8 miles, 1.25 miles grass horses this year than in recent seasons. In like a couple years ago, maybe this horse could have snuck into a big win, but I don't see it this year.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think races like the one he competed in on Sunday at Pimlico will be the right ones for him in the future.
Yeah, the runner-up has had quite an excellent year after being claimed for what, 40,000 last.
Yeah, I think something around that.
Yeah, he ran really well at Fairgrounds, 2 stakes wins and another stakes second, stakes third, and he's holding his form. I mean, that's an excellent claim. That I'm going to guess that he's the leading son of Datalink at this point. Logical myth.
You might be right about that. I can't remember too many high-achieving sons of Datalink.
No, there aren't too many.
I couldn't believe that he was actually sent off at 13-1 in this race.
Yeah, me either.
It wasn't that long ago that he was accomplishing those win and second place finishes in those stakes you mentioned at the Fairgrounds. And I know he flopped last time behind Set Piece, who might be pretty good in his own right. But he got a little bit of class relief here, and he ran pretty well. They went for home pretty early with him, but Pixelate was just a little too much in the end.
Yeah, which may be an indictment.
The other stakes that we want to mention from Sunday at Pimlico was the Shine Again, going 6 furlongs. This one was won by the still undefeated Chubwagon, a 4-year-old filly who has yet to lose in 7 career starts. They had entered her in the Bed of Roses on the Belmont Stakes Racing Festival week, but they decided to scratch from that one and instead go for what seemed like an easier spot in the Shine Again, though I'm not sure how much easier it actually turned out to be because the runner-up, Hello Beautiful, she's pretty good on her day.
Yeah, I agree with you. And the Bed of Roses was no great race either. Although, I mean, the winner did run pretty well. But the horse had worked so fast, like the week of the race.
Yeah, remember that 44.
What did she have? A 44.71 half mile. I do wonder if that had something to do with waiting a little longer. That had to have taken something out of her if it's an accurate time. But what was her time form figure, David? I see she got a 92 buyer.
I don't think we yet have the TimeformUS figures for
Yeah.
Pimlico. But yeah, as you said, the buyer was a 92 for this shine again.
Yeah, which is down from her tops, which, you wonder about, I guess, a little bit, the 99. I suppose that's fairly accurate.
I do wonder about that figure quite a bit. It's tough to make figures for the winter at Aqueduct.
Oh, God.
Buddy.
The poor figure makers at Aqueduct, I mean, running over the plowed field day after day where, 1:11.68 starts to look pretty darn fast with the raw times that were being put up there. But, for people in the WINNZ category, the horse has never lost, and now she's a 3-time stakes winner. I'm not seeing a lot of progress, as far as her getting faster. In fact, she may have hit her plateau to some extent. I think this race kind of bore that out. I don't know how much more she has to find. I thought she had a pretty decent trip in this race, and didn't do. I mean, she certainly didn't draw off. And while the filly she beat is okay, I mean, I don't think she's not a grade 1 type of horse. I just don't know how much upside Chubwagon still really has.
Yeah, I mean, the progress that we've seen from Chubwagon, I suppose, is in the additional versatility in her running style, because they've tried taking her off the pace now in her last couple of starts. And maybe the fact that she hasn't earned her best speed figures in those 2 races suggests that she's a little better when they allow her to go to the front end. And clearly in this race, with the presence of Hello Beautiful and also Don't Let Sweet Fool Ya, who both have a lot of speed, I could see why they decided to rate Chubwagon. But maybe she is a horse that's just a little bit better when she can control things on the front end. I thought she ran fine in here. I mean, she was game to run down Hello Beautiful, who did come with her A race here, and her top race is pretty good. She's just become a little bit inconsistent, and you can't always trust her to deliver that performance. But I thought the top 2 both ran pretty well.
Yeah. I wonder, I mean, there are plenty of races like this to pick off all up and down the East Coast, and I think those are legitimate horses at this level, grade 3. If you get them into a legitimate race at Saratoga or something, I would wonder how competitive they would be. But it's not the strongest division this year either. So, if a horse like that has another level to find, then maybe they could be that type.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you with the quality of the division. I mean, both the male and female sprint divisions on the dirt right now are just, they look in a little bit of turmoil. I mean, I don't think we quite know what we're going to see from Gamine this year based on her 2 appearances earlier in the spring.
Absolutely.
And Kamari, I mean, she's one of those horses that kind of appears by appointment only. I mean, she looked good winning that Madison. But beyond those 2, it's pretty wide open still. So, I mean, I guess it remains to be seen where a horse like Chubwagon is going to fit.
Yeah, it's a really good point.
The other race that I wanted to mention from Pimlico on Sunday was actually not a stakes event. It was an allowance race, non-winners of one other than going 6 furlongs, the same distance as the Shine Again for the fillies. And this is one that actually went almost exactly the same final time as the Shine Again. The winner of this race, Edie Meeny Miny Mo, went just 0.06 of a second slower than Chubwagon in winning. And she was pretty visually impressive in doing so. I mean, this was just the second start of her career, but based on this effort, it seems like she might have a real future.
Yeah, I didn't look at her buyer yet, but she got a mere 66 first time out in one of those optional maiden races in Maryland, where open 40 or Maryland bred maiden special weight. And interestingly, blinkers on off a win, which most places you need to get steward's permission to do that.
I saw that in the form, blinkers on, but when I watched the replay, she was not wearing blinkers. I've never really noticed
she didn't have them on
before, but yes, apparently they made that late change where they did not actually use blinkers.
That would seem pretty weird, to show good tactical speed and draw off and win by more than 4, and then decide that she needed blinkers for some reason. So that is something of a relief to find that out. Yeah, I wonder if they'll run her through her allowance conditions. Did you see what buyer she got? I don't know how fast they rated the race.
A 91 buyer, which for a 3-year-old filly is pretty impressive.
It's pretty good. Yeah. I haven't looked at the stake schedule around there, but a 3-year-old sprint stakes might be made to order for this horse.
Yeah, and as you said, being a Maryland bred, she definitely has options with where they can go next. I mean, she was purchased for $400,000, which is a lot of money for a Maryland bred. Obviously, that
Yeah.
was based on a 2-year-old sales workout. I didn't look up the time, but it must have been pretty impressive. And I mean, these are connections. The trainer, you don't really think of him as having a lot of expensive horses, but clearly she's one that's delivering in the afternoon. So I'll just be interested to see where they go from here because she clearly has a lot of speed. And I was watching the early portion of this race, and it almost looked like she was trying to run up on heels as they attempted to raid her off a couple of horses. And once she got through, she just exploded away from the field. So, I mean, arguably just as impressive as Chubwagon, albeit against a weaker field. So
Yeah.
I'll be interested to see where they go.
Yeah. I mean, you make a great point that that furlong in 11:98 after they let her go, and that's where she showed the speed she'd been wanting to show earlier. She could probably go faster than she went, even though she was going a pretty decent tempo during the early stages too.
Moving on to the one other graded stakes that took place this past weekend, and that was at Churchill Downs, the Mint Julep on the turf, going 2 turns for the fillies and mares. And the heavy, heavy favorite in this race was the recent Jenny Wiley winner, Juliet Foxtrot. But Juliet Foxtrot hasn't always been the most reliable horse, especially at a short price, and she didn't have much excuse to lose this one.
Knew she was going to lose. I just couldn't come up with the right horse. And there were only two I considered, and Minted, the winner, was one of them. But I went to the disappointing second choice, Hendy Woods, who may have taken a step back off of her last race, which really isn't that surprising. But the reason, I mean, Juliet Foxtrot, I mean, sure, she got the easiest lead imaginable. And Tom Maher is not, well, she got a bad trip in the Just a Game, but I don't know how good she is. It's not so much that that race, it wasn't the questionable circumstances that benefited her so much as the fact that she was supposed to run in other spots. She was going to go to the Gamely, and then she got a temperature or something, just some little thing that kept her from getting on a plane. And they said they considered going to Just a Game too, and she, why, didn't want to ship her right then. Whenever I hear anything like that with a horse that's a price this short, I mean, I think you always have to, your ears should prick up, and you should be looking to find an alternative. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I thought she got an ideal trip and had the race won at the stretch call. She just couldn't finish it off. And it's not like they came home like a scorching fraction, 6:27 for the final half furlong.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that she really had circumstances on her side when she won that Jenny Wiley. Clearly, she's a horse that doesn't mind some giving the ground.
Oh,
As
yeah,
you said,
I agree with that.
Yeah, as you said, there was no speed in that race, and I think the competition in that Jenny Wiley was a little bit questionable compared to some Jenny Wileys that we've seen in the past. So
Absolutely.
she probably was a little bit overrated coming out of that race. But like you said, I would have had trouble coming up with this winner Minted, whose prior form just didn't look like it was really at the same level as Juliet Foxtrot or even a few others in this race. But she took a big step forward for Brendan Walsh.
Well, I liked her in her last race, and I thought she had the look of an improving horse. I mean, granted, she's 5, but she's only run 8 times, excuse me. But what really benefited, the reason that she looked pretty good in that Churchill Downs race on Oaks Day was the incredibly slow paces in front of her in her 2 starts last summer, and she finally got a decent pace, and she made the most of it. But now, I mean, in this race, they didn't exactly fly ahead of her either. It was a pretty moderate tempo. And she was closer than she's been at times. I just think that I think she's a horse who had some talent, and just in the last couple months was able to start exercising it for whatever reason.
Yeah, I mean, I remember it took her a very long time to even make a start in this country because I think I'm thinking of the right horse. I believe she originally was with Chad Brown back in 2018 as a 2-year-old when she came over. And I remember her being entered in a stakes like the Miss Griot or something. And then she was scratched and then she like disappeared for a long time. And they obviously was given over to Brendan Walsh. And she didn't look like much last year, I have to be honest. But
No.
as you said, her last race was a step in the right direction. Seems like they just finally have her going in top form at the age of 5.
Now there you go. Saratoga workouts, 7:30, 2018, 8:6, 8:13, 8:19.
Yeah.
She I think you can surmise that she had some sort of injury that was significant enough to keep her out for a while, and that may have A, retarded her development, and B, not, kept her from getting too many miles on her. If you get a 5-year-old mature horse without too many starts, they do have a chance to make a lot of progress in a short time.
Yeah, all of that said, this was not the fastest race in the world. I think the
Oh
Beyer
no,
was
this was
in the low
it was
90s.
yeah, it was a poor race. I mean, those are. I mean, you'd be hard pressed to distinguish, and this is why Minted won when the way the race shaked out, and the way a lot of the horses looked on paper. I don't think it was that much tougher than the race she just ran in. A solid three other than. I wouldn't let the grading of this race fool you going forward. It was not as good a race as its grade.
Yeah, that was the stakes race at Churchill from last week. I do want to mention a couple of races from their Sunday card, both of which were won by 3-year-olds. One of those was a 7-furlong allowance won by the Ride of a Lifetime. And this is a horse that looked pretty promising last summer when he won his debut pretty impressively and then was second to Jackie's Warrior in the Saratoga Special. Obviously, some things went wrong for him. He didn't want to stretch out in the Iroquois, needed a couple starts off the layoff as a 3-year-old, but this race suggests that maybe he's getting back into top form.
Yeah, it was a nice bounce back race, and you mentioned he had showed signs in his previous start. I don't know if it was the mile. Maybe it was the mile. I mean, it was a hot pace in the Iroquois. He was 4-5 in that race. He did run abominably. It was a big step back, and I was really. I think he worked at fairgrounds over the winter, and I was kind of interested to see, what he was going to be like coming back. And boy, his Keeneland race was just disastrous.
Yeah.
So I mean, maybe he's a candy ride. He probably could get. I mean, he got 7/8 here. I mean, I mentioned the mile in the Iroquois because I think he probably could get a mile. I just don't know how much upside there is here. I like this was his peak race for this little form cycle. We'll see if he can gather himself again and go up another level. But I'm skeptical.
Yeah, the weird thing for me about that Keeneland race, where he obviously finished disappointingly in last, was that they rode him so close to the pace through a
Yeah,
pretty quick fraction. I mean, they were 21-4 for the opening quarter. And I mean, he is a horse that had shown some speed in the past, but he had also rated kindly. And this last time in the race on Sunday, it seemed like they made a real decision to take him much farther off the pace. And he produced a nice stretch rally. And maybe that's the key to him. They just have to wait with him and then produce that run, because I was pretty impressed with the way he finished over the final eighth of a mile. He really kicked away from the field at the end. So I'm not sure what his ceiling really is. I think there are probably better 3-year-old sprinters out there, but I wonder if he's just a horse that maybe the connections have finally figured out.
yeah, it'd be nice to see because I think the talent's there, and I like the trainer. I like to see people I like do well.
Other horse that I want to mention from Churchill last week is actually another Brendan Walsh trainee. He had the winner minted of that mint Julep, and he also the winner of a maiden race on Sunday, Business Model, who won at 9-1, going the 1-turn mile at Churchill. This is a race that came up pretty fast on the Beyer scale. I haven't yet seen the TimeformUS number. Got an 89 Beyer. This was the first start as a 3-year-old for Business Model, who's a pretty well-bred son of Candy Ride. Just a horse that kind of looked like a work in progress as a 2-year-old, and maybe he's returned as a 3-year-old that's going to make an impact in this division.
Yeah, this one I liked a lot more than Ride of a Lifetime. And there was a loose horse that he had to deal with in this race too. It didn't bother him at all. It might have impeded. I don't know. I don't think though. The loose horse ran a pretty professional race. I don't think he had that much to do with it. And I will say, I mean, you're left trying to figure out what the first Lasix means here. Is it just a horse that matured since his last start in October and that accounts for most of the improvement, but he didn't run on Lasix at all as a 2-year-old? Did Lasix help him? These are, I mean, you can't know until there's more information. So basically, don't worry about it is the way I would look at it. Godolphin, Pixel 8, pretty good weekend for Godolphin, not surprisingly. But this horse, I like the way he goes. He's a nice stride. He ran I thought, straight and efficiently when he hit high gear for him, going past the quarter pole to 3/16 when he attacked the front runners and started to draw away. I thought he made a nice sustained run. He was in traffic part of the way. It wasn't like an insane pace that set it up for him. And I think he's really promising. He is a ridgeling, which can bring with it its own issues. But I really liked his race, and I'm interested to see where this guy goes.
Yeah, that stride that you pointed out is what caught my eye the most with this horse. He just has a really nice way of moving, and the candy rides, you often think of them as having really ugly strides on them.
Yeah,
But
they
this
often
guy's
do.
got a
Yeah.
this guy's got a really smooth way of going. It seems like he covers a lot of ground, and he just kept coming through the stretch. And they came home a pretty quick final quarter mile, but he made up ground into it and was drawing off at the end. And he's out of a damn innovative idea, who I think was a good horse for Godolphin.
Yeah.
She, I think, won a stakes in Kentucky at some point. The Groupie Doll, a grade 3, when she was a 4-year-old. And there's good pedigree going back to the second dam, Golden Velvet, who's produced some good runners for Godolphin in the past. So definitely a horse that looks like he might have some talent and could progress in the future.
Yeah, I think he's a candidate to be equally effective at a middle distance around 2 turns as well.
Let's get back to the sprinters to close out the U.S. portion of this Pacecast. As we talk about one race from California, that was the Thor's Echo, a California-bred stakes going 6 furlongs on the dirt. And Brickyard Ride is a really tough horse to figure out. I mean, there were times earlier in the year when I thought he might be a grade 1 level sprinter because he was running the kind of speed figures that we frankly weren't seeing from the horses that were competing in the graded stakes races anywhere in the country. And he pops another huge buyer here of 104, but he's just a really tough horse to rely on.
Well, I don't want to oversimplify it, but I think I have him figured out, David. He's a coward. And if there is a horse anywhere near him when he's on the lead, he's going to panic, and he's going to probably stop breathing properly, and he's not going to finish. If he can run, okay, I'm going to walk back the coward part. That's anthropomorphizing. I don't know what he is, but all I know is he's one of those horses, if he's by himself and in the clear, he's extremely fast. And some horses are extremely fast just if they get to the front. Other horses need to not have any other horses around. And if there are no other horses around him, then he's going to keep going because he's really, really fast and has that rare ability to sustain that and get 6 furlongs without slowing down enough for horses to catch him. The problem is when you start getting into better races than this Calbred Stakes, where it seemed like he was going to get that trip that he needed, there's almost always going to be a horse at least staying close. And I just wonder, even if they stay close and he can sense them right behind him, if that doesn't trigger the negative flood of whatever it is that keeps him from showing his best.
Yeah, it's funny. I almost wonder if they'd be better off trying some tougher spots with him, because maybe it's just by chance, but it seems like a lot of these top-level sprints lately have not been coming up with that much early speed in them.
Good point.
And, he seems like a horse that could take advantage of some of those circumstances if he can get brave on the front end without that early pressure. As you rightly point out, when he gets it, he typically does not run his best races. We saw 2 back when he just completely fell apart against Calbreds in an allowance race, losing as the 1-5 favorite. But when he gets things his own way on the front end, he can pop a pretty big speed figure. And the one thing I did like about this performance last weekend is that in the past, sometimes, even when he was by himself on the front end, he would just run off and go too fast. And at least in this race, the jockey was able to get him back a little bit. And I should point out, they did make a rider switch for this race to Juan Hernandez.
Maybe a more experienced professional rider just has a different set of hands, a different feel, and gives the horse a different feel, and is able to transmit that and just help him to switch off just a little bit, which is really beneficial, as you mentioned.
Yeah, he's just a horse that I'd be interested to see what they decide to do with him, because it seems like when you've got a horse like this that kind of got good out of nowhere, maybe you want to strike while the iron's hot and try some tougher company.
For sure.
Well, that was all the U.S. racing to recap from this past week. As I said at the top of the show, though, it's a big weekend week over in England for the Royal Ascot meet. 5 days of just top-level racing that kicked off today with, I think, 3 grade 1s, or group 1s, I should say, the Queen Anne, the King's Stand, and the St. James Palace. I was watching some of them this morning, some pretty impressive performances. I mean, Palace Pier looked great winning the Queen Anne, but especially Poetic Flare. Just what a cool horse to have that level of activity in a short amount of time and produce a performance like that in the St. James's Palace.
I agree. I thought he was the star of the day today. It's a Jim Bolger horse. Bolger, He's a senior citizen. I don't know quite how old he is, but he trained the horse's sire. He bred this horse. He said he's bred all the generations going back to the 80s. And as you mentioned, David, I mean, I've never seen, now I've been covering European racing that long, but I certainly have never seen a horse run in the 2000 Guineas at Newmarket, then the French version of the 2000 Guineas roughly 2 weeks later, and then the Irish 2000 Guineas, which came this year 6 days after the race in France. And not only that, the horse had a prep before he won the English 2000 Guineas. So I think this was his fourth start in 6 weeks and fifth start already of a campaign that began April 11th. And he ran the best race he's ever run. I thought he was spectacular today. Looked to me like, with the weight he would get, if he goes to the Sussex Stakes at Goodwood and Palace Pier goes to the Sussex, I think he gets at least 7 pounds as a 3-year-old, maybe more. It would be an interesting race because I thought he was extremely impressive. I will say that this is probably as firm as you'll ever see the Royal Ascot. The course is, they struggle to get it above good because they water it quite significantly, but it was good to firm all around today, and apparently that is what Poetic Flair wants. His subpar race in France came on a course that was much softer than this. He couldn't produce anything close to the acceleration he showed today in England. If he can get the right sort of surface, and if he has more development in him through the summer, he's going to be really fun to watch.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that was, for me, the most visually impressive performance of the day. And I can't think of a corollary in England or any other European country, especially not in the US, for a horse that has run in that many top-level races in a short period of time, at least in the past couple of decades. Just a really cool thing to see, and he's obviously none the worse for the wear for doing that. We also have plenty of racing coming up the next few weeks. I know that you've been covering some of it on DRF.com and in the daily racing forum. Do you have anything that you're particularly looking forward to over the next few days of racing at Royal Ascot?
Well, I'm definitely looking forward to tomorrow to see Love run for the first time since last August 20th, I believe, in the Yorkshire Oaks. And she faces last year's Prince of Wales's winner, Lord North, who won very well in Dubai earlier this year in a subpar renewal of the Dubai turf. The Prince of Wales should be really. I Love was so amazing. At the end of she won the Guineas, she won the Oaks, and then she was dominant in the Yorkshire Oaks. She was favored to win the Arc. She was put away late in the summer because they had an extremely wet fall in Europe, and she's a top of the ground kind of horse who really doesn't want to get down into it at all. And then her intended debut in the Tattersall's Gold Cup last month in Ireland. The same thing happened. A tremendous of rain over the weekend. She had to be scratched. Now she's going to get, even if it rains some, the ground will be okay for her. Can't wait to see what she has to offer.
Yeah, I remember she was a horse that there was briefly some chatter about her maybe coming from the Breeders' Cup last year, and they obviously elected not to do that. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see her return, as well as Lord North, and even Ardaria, who we know from the Breeders' Cup last year is in this race, but seems like maybe an ambitious spot for her.
Well, she's 15-1 or so, for whatever that's worth. I mean, as the bookies try to middle their positions. But yeah, it is an ambitious spot. But I Love, given what she wants to do and who trains her, Aidan O'Brien, I mean, I would have to think that if all goes well, she's a candidate to show up at Del Mar. And if she turns out to be the horse it looks like she might be, that would be really cool. Lord North, he came to Keeneland. He was a decent fourth in the Breeders' Cup turf. I don't think he ran his best race that day. But I don't think eye to eye, if they're both set to run to their best, that I don't think he can beat Love. But Love's been away for so long now, you just wonder how sharp she's going to be.
Yeah, for sure. And later in the week, we've got that Ascot Gold Cup where Stradivarius will be going for 4 in a row. I mean, that's, you can't say it's unprecedented because Yates did it a few years ago, but that's just a really cool thing to see when you have got star horses that are around for that long. So it'll be great to see him in action. I believe that is Thursday, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. And the stayers, they don't usually, if you have a 4-year-old that comes to hand and can compete in races like that, that's young. So that just gives them the opportunity to develop and continue on. I mean, he's an amazing horse. He ended last year and on a real downside. They tried him in the Arc, which I didn't think was ever going to work, and it didn't. He wasn't competitive, but then he just couldn't get over the boggy course in the British Champion Long Distance Cup to end the year. So he had two stains on his resume, so to speak, at the end of the year, but bounced back with a nice first outing of the year. But I do think he meets a formidable foe in this 4-year-old subjectivist who really finished off last season with flourish when he was stretched out, I think maybe it was close to 2 miles in France, and then won well first time up. He doesn't get much weight. He gets only a pound and tries 2.5 miles, which is a long race even in the European staying division. So that's an open question how he sees it out. But I do think he handles various course conditions and has some as progressiveness to him. He might be a 5 to 6 to 1 shot in that race.
Yeah, that's one that I'm definitely looking forward to. It's always cool to see those accomplishments by horses who are around for many years. And so Stradivarius is one that we've become familiar with watching from across the pond. So definitely looking forward to seeing him race on Thursday. Well, Marcus, thanks for joining me this week. It was nice to have these conversations. Not so much top-level racing this past week, but
not quite.
But no. I think we saw some horses that we will get to see a little more of in the upcoming weeks, including those two that ran at Monmouth Park on Saturday and Sunday.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure to speak to you, David.
Great. Remember that you can always listen to these podcasts on DRF.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Just make sure to subscribe to that Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for tuning in this week, and I will be having another guest on the podcast on Friday as DRF analyst Mike Beer will join me to talk about some of the weekend stakes racing. So stay tuned for that, the TimeformUS forecast on Friday.